Hello, beautiful people. Welcome back to my channel where we discuss everything theology and apologetics. In today's video, we're going to be discussing why 1 Corinthians 13 verse 8 is a game changer for believers. If you've been a believer for any amount of time, then you've probably heard this verse before, or maybe you've even memorized it. Let's get into the nitty-gritty of what makes this verse such a game changer. Before we dive in, I would love to ask that you hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't already, so you can join us every single week for brand new videos. Okay, so this verse reads, "Love never fails. But if I speak in tongues, prophecy, or have faith so as to remove mountains, but have not love, I am nothing." Now, this passage comes from the New Testament in the book of 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verses 8 and 9. This letter was written by the Apostle Paul to the church in Corinth. The city of Corinth was known for its immorality, its idolatry, and its lack of knowledge about God. So when Paul wrote this letter, he addressed many different issues that the church there was facing. One of those issues was an issue with love, which is the overarching theme of chapter 13. The main idea of this passage is that no matter what gift a person has, whether they speak in tongues, prophesy, or even move mountains, if they don't have love, none of those things matter at all. Love is the greatest of all spiritual gifts. It's better than speaking in tongues, having faith, or performing miracles. Nothing else matters if we don't have love. If you've heard this verse before, you may have heard it as, "Love never fails," in 1 Corinthians 13, verse 8. Because most people just pull out that one phrase and say that without mentioning the rest of the verse. And while that phrase, "love never fails," is true and should be repeated and believed, the context of the passage as a whole needs to be understood in order. To truly grasp the meaning of this verse and why it is such a game changer. So let's break down the verse a little bit more. First, Paul writes, "Love never fails." What does this mean? Well, in the Greek language, the word love here is the word agape. Agape refers to the kind of love that we are called to as Christians, which is a selfless, sacrificial, and unconditional kind of love. It's a love that seeks the highest good of another person, even at our own expense. So Paul says that this kind of love will never fail, which means that it will never run out, it will never grow weak, and it will never let us down. Many people think that love is a feeling, but Christian love is more than just a feeling. Yes, we may feel love towards someone, but we are commanded to love people whether we feel it or not. Love is a choice. It's something that we decide to do, and it's something that we practice. Don't wait until we feel like it. Loving people is part of being a Christian. It's not an option. So since Christian love is a choice and not just a feeling, it will never fail because God's love for us never failed. He chose to send Jesus to die for us while we were yet sinners, even though we didn't deserve it, and even though we didn't feel love towards God at the time. Because of God's love for us, we can love others. We have the Holy Spirit living inside of us, who helps us to love the way that we're supposed to, so we can choose to love people no matter how they treat us. But Paul doesn't stop there. He continues on to say, "But if I speak in tongues, prophecy, or have faith so as to remove mountains, but have not love, I am nothing." Now, as I mentioned earlier, the main idea of chapter 13 is love. In chapter 12, Paul talks about spiritual gifts, and in chapter 14, he talks about speaking in tongues and prophecy. So this verse ties all three chapters together. In this verse, Paul gives examples of the most powerful spiritual gifts, speaking in tongues and prophecy, and the greatest act of faith, moving mountains. And he says that if we have these gifts, or if we use them, but we don't have love, then we gain nothing. We are nothing. Let's break this down a little bit more. First, he mentions speaking in tongues. Speaking in tongues was the ability to speak in a language that you did not know. In the New Testament, the Holy Spirit gave some believers the ability to speak in different languages. This happened most commonly during the time of the early church. So some people say that this gift of speaking in tongues isn't around anymore. However, I believe that this is a gift that still exists today. I personally have the gift of speaking in tongues. I speak in other languages that I have never studied and do not know. The only way that I can explain it is that I feel like I'm being completely overtaken by the Holy Spirit, and I do and have control over what I'm saying. That's how I know that I'm actually speaking in tongues. So if you have the ability to speak in tongues, that is a gift from God. That is a supernatural ability that you should thank God for. However, Paul says that if you do this and you don't have love, then it doesn't really mean anything. So I could be up on my tippy toes right now speaking in tongues, and it wouldn't mean anything if I didn't have love in my heart. My actions must be backed up by my heart. Actions without a pure heart are meaningless. He goes on to talk about prophecy. Prophecy is the ability to speak God's will and message through the Holy Spirit. In the Old Testament, there were many prophets who spoke messages from God to the people. Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Habakkuk, to name a few. In the New Testament, there were many people who prophesied the message of God. So this gift of prophecy isn't something that's exclusive to the Old Testament. It's something that existed in the New Testament as well. Some people believe that this gift doesn't exist anymore, but I believe that it does. Prophecy is a gift that should be exercised when you're in the presence of other people. Don't prophesy to yourself. You should prophesy to the body, meaning the church. Prophecy should encourage, should uplift, should inspire, should enlighten, should warn, or should correct. There are many different types of prophecy. Again, I'm not going to get into that in this video. But the point is, if you have the gift of prophecy and you prophesy to people, but your heart isn't right, then your prophecies mean absolutely nothing. They have no power. They don't change anyone's life. They don't build up the body. And lastly, Paul mentions faith. Faith is the belief in and trust in something that we cannot see. Faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. Hebrews 11 verse 1. In this passage, Paul is referring to the kind of faith that enables us to do extraordinary things for God. For example, when the disciples asked Jesus to increase their faith, he replied, "If you have faith the size of a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, 'Move from here to there,' and it will move. Nothing will be impossible for you." Matthew 17 verse 20. Here Jesus is implying that if we had faith, we could move mountains. So Paul is referring to this kind of faith, faith that moves mountains. And he says that if we do this, and if we have faith that is strong enough to move a mountain, but we don't have love, then it doesn't mean anything. So what's the lesson here? What's the takeaway? What are we supposed to learn from this verse? Well, the lesson here is that no spiritual gift or extraordinary thing that we do for God is more important than love. No matter what we do for God, it's never going to be greater than what God has done for us. Why He sent His Son to die for us while we were yet sinners. Romans 5 verse 8. God showed us the greatest act of love that has ever been shown. Nothing that we do will ever be greater than that. So why do we focus on the flashy stuff? Why do we focus on the gifts rather than on love? Why do we boast in our blessings instead of boasting in the Lord? Why do we boast in our deliverance instead of boasting in Jesus who delivered us? We need to humble ourselves and remember that we are only vessels of God's grace. And I want you to look at verse 9. It reads, "For I know this, that if I dwell in Him, and He in me, I shall receive the reward which is laid up for me in heaven." When we focus on love, we will receive our reward in heaven. Do you want a reward in heaven? You want to go to heaven and receive a crown? Then live a life full of love. Show love to those around you, to those who are hurting, to those who are different from you, to those who don't believe what you believe. Show love. That is the only way that we will receive a reward in heaven. We need to make sure that our actions are always backed up by our heart. What good is it to speak in tongues if your heart isn't right? What good is it to prophesy if your heart isn't right? What good is it to move mountains if your heart isn't right? This verse is a game changer because it humbles us and reminds us to focus on love above all else. I hope that you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please make sure that you hit that thumbs up button and subscribe if you have UNT already, so you can join us every single week for brand new videos. You guys are amazing, and I'll see you soon. God's own.